Hey guys, welcome back to the chat. Today we'll be talking about camera basics. Okay, so congratulations, you just bought your first camera. Clap your hands. Okay, let's clap hands. Let's clap hands. Everybody clap hands for this person, you watching this video. If you're watching this video, I'm assuming you just got your camera, and if I influenced you to get a camera, you probably got the A7 IV. So in today's video, we're gonna be talking about camera basics. The moment you get your camera, some of the things that you need to understand how to get a good picture out of your camera. So in today's video, we're going to be touching on the three main things you need to know when you own a camera, whether you're doing this for photography or video. The three main settings on your camera that are important for you to understand are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. These are the fundamental three that you need to know, because this helps you with your exposure. Okay, this is called the triangle of exposure. If you mess up these three things, you can forget your picture. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to be talking about is aperture. What is aperture? So the dictionary definition of aperture is the opening of a lens through which light passes. When you hit the shutter release button to take the picture, the camera aperture opens to the predetermined width, letting specific amount of light through. A large aperture lets more light in, and vice versa. Aperture is calibrated in f-stops, written in numbers like 1.4, 2, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, and 16. The larger the number, the narrower the aperture. So on your lens, how you think about this, essentially, it's think about your lens or your camera's sensor being an eye, right? So it will look like this. The more you open it, the more light goes through. Okay, this is it's gonna look weird, but all right. So in essence, what a photo is your camera is essentially capturing light. So the amount of light that you let in determines how your picture looks, whether it's dark or whether it's brighter. So what you want to do is to make sure that you understand what you're doing. So in most cases, and this is the weird part, the lower the number, the more open your sensor is, right? So if you have f2.8 on a lens, so let's say your lens, you have the one that I recommended that you guys get, the 28-70 contemporary lens from Sigma. That one has a 2.8. That's the lowest it will go, right? So at 2.8, what you want to do is what's happening is that's when it's open. That's the most it will open. The more higher you go, the more it closes. So it's like from f2.8, if you go to f.4, that means if 2.8 is like this, and then at f.4, it means less light goes through. The amount of times that you want to use this and where you want to think about using aperture is it affects your focal length. So with aperture, it affects what's in the depth of field of an image. So by depth of field, essentially you're thinking about if you want your backgrounds to be super blurry and focus certain things, you want to open up that aperture. The more that you open it, or the higher you go, the more in focus the entire area around you is. So it's basically like the human eye, right? So you know how when we are trying to look at things, how we squint our eyes to be able to see more. It's like you control the light. That's essentially how it works, all right? And the next thing that you want to think about is shutter speed. So what is shutter speed? Shutter speed is how long the camera shutter is open, exposing the image to light, typically measured in milliseconds to minutes. If the shutter is left open for a long time, a lot of light is being let in, which could overexpose the image. When there are moving subjects in your photo, a slower shutter speed could cause motion blur. If the speed is quick, it's likely the picture will come out too dark. Okay, so shutter speed as well, what you want to think is, when we said aperture, that's how far you are opening up the lens when you're taking a photo. And then when you're taking a picture, that's how fast it opens and closes, how fast your sensor opens and closes, right? So if it opens and stays open for a long time, more light goes in, which is good if you want to get a lot of light in, if you want to get more light for your image, if you want to expose it high. But in most cases, you want to keep that so low so that you just get the right amount of light into your camera. So what you want to think about when it comes to shutter speed, in most cases for video, they use what they call I believe is the 180 rule, whereby if you're taking a video at 24 frames per second, you want to double that. So you want to take for 24 seconds per second 24 frames per second. If you want your video to be set at 48, but in most cameras they only offer 50, which is the closest. So that's just the standard rule whereby you double whatever. So if you're shooting at 24, your shutter speed will be 48. If you're shooting at 30, your shutter speed will be 60, 1/60th of a second. This is just the unspoken rule or the spoken rule standard thing that's there, because essentially and for me, I don't really like playing with shutter speed, because then once you do it, you start running into the issues of motion blur. You start running into those issues. But if that's your artistic style, then hey, go for it. In most cases, what you want to do with your shutter speed is, if you're shooting in the dark, right? One of the challenges that I've had, like, I haven't been able to take quality pictures in the dark, but the only way you can do it is to figure out how to play with these two settings. But in most cases, what you want to do in the dark is open your lens as much as you can in terms of f-stops. If you can go to an f1.4, and then I was recommended that the most you want to open your shutter speed is to 1/100. Don't go anything above that, and then place your camera on a tripod, because if you shake, the amount of motion blur that you get will be affected. And then the final member of the exposure triangle is what they call ISO. So what is ISO? ISO is what measures your camera's sensitivity to light. More specifically, how sensitive the digital sensor is to the light. It also measures the film sensitivity if using a traditional camera. It's represented in numbers such as 50, 100, 200, 400, 800, 1.6, 3.2, etc. When you change the ISO on a digital camera, you are rendering the sensor more or less sensitive to light. The lower the ISO number, the less sensitive the sensor is to light. Higher ISO numbers have high sensitivity. So when you change the ISO from 100 to 200, you are doubling your sensor sensitivity. In well-lit environments, a lower ISO 200 or below should be used. When shooting in low light situations, a higher ISO 400 to above is best. ISO 100 is considered standard. Higher numbers are best for darker situations, but keep in mind, higher ISO could cause grainy images. ISO is only one point on the exposure triangle, which also includes shutter speed and aperture. Using all three, ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, help to balance an image's grain and exposure. So when it comes to ISO, you want to be very careful, because I once heard that it's artificial light within your camera, right? So you want to be very careful with it. In most cameras, the Sony a7 IV, which has dual native ISO, so on the lower threshold you had 640, and then the higher threshold you had 3200. So those are the main two that you can use natively within the camera without it clipping or causing noise within your picture. So right now I'm using the FX3 and the A7 IV. On the A7 IV, in order to match with the FX3, we had 3.2. For the FX3, you can get more light. I think its dual native ISO is 812.8. So right now, it's the FX3. What can you do about it? But with the A7 IV, those are your main two. You can play around in between, but the best one, the native ISOs, is 640 and then 3.2. And then what happens with ISO, where it becomes clutch, is when you're shooting in like dark places, right? You're pretty much limited to what you can do with shutter speed and aperture, but there's a lot more you can do with ISO. The only problem is if you put in too much ISO, you start to introduce noise, and you don't really want noise in your images because you lose that sharpness. But it can also be an artistic style. All right, now that you have an understanding of these three, I will be doing more videos talking about how these things work, but you want to use them in tandem together. So think of it as a triangle. The higher you go, it affects something else. So when you increase ISO, you want to see how that affects your aperture in order to get the type of picture that you want. A lot of this it will come down to experimentation and what you want to do and what you're trying to achieve in order to make it work. With that said, guys, let me know which other tutorials and other things about your cameras that you want to find out that I can help you with. I hope you enjoy using your camera that you got. If you have the A7 IV, hello. If you have the FX3, hey, this one I pretty much can't teach you much at this point in time. But these three things is essentially what each and any camera that you're using uses. So this video can be for anybody who's not even a Sony shooter. With that said, I'll see you guys in the next one.